Hello and welcome to my channel, Art with Lexi. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to draw an origami sailboat. And the reason that I came up with this class is to practice getting every shade out of one pencil. So as you can see, we have lots of sections of the sailboat, and every section is going to be a different shade. So a different level of lightness or darkness. Now, all of the shades are relative. So the darkest section is this section here in the front on the left side. That we could say is 100% darkness. It's as dark as possible. The lightest section is this back piece on the left side, which is just paper. We don't even touch it with any pencil. That is 0% darkness. There's nothing. And we're going to try to get pretty much everything in between. So if this front section here is 100% darkness, the next darkest section needs to be this triangle on the left side. So we could say that's maybe 90% darkness. Not as dark as possible, but a little bit lighter. The next darkest section is the front here on the right side, and we could say that's maybe 80 or 70% darkness. Now if we look at the triangle that sticks up from the middle of the boat, on the left side of the triangle is right in the middle, 50% darkness, exactly in between the lightest and the darkest shades we get out of the pencil. The right side of the triangle needs to be lighter than that, so maybe 40% lightness. On the right side, what we see of the back inside edge of the boat, this needs to be lighter still, so it needs to be about 30 or 20% darkness. We will have a little shadow in the corner, but the general shade of this area should be quite light. Now the lightest section that we touch is the right side of the boat. This needs to be about 10%, so it's pretty much as light as you can get the pencil to be. So all of our shades are relative. As we go along and we draw, we can assess if certain sections need to be lighter or darker so that they fall into this sort of order. Now, I will warn you that it's always easier to go darker than it is to go lighter. So, it's better if you're not quite sure about the shade, if you go a little bit lighter, and you can always darken it later. Now, the way that we get different shades out of the pencil primarily is by controlling the pressure of the pencil on the paper. The harder you press, the darker the shade. The lighter you press, the lighter the shade. So let's go ahead and get started. The supplies are simple. I have a regular graphite pencil, a number 2 pencil like what you would use in school. I have paper, I have an eraser, and I'm actually using a secondary pencil as a straight edge. Now you can use anything as a straight edge. I'm often in the habit of using a pencil as a straight edge because I always have one handy. As you follow along with the tutorial, feel free to pause the video to work on each section. We need to start by mapping out the shape of the boat. Now, I will always use a colored pencil as a straight edge for all my straight lines. You can use another pencil, a ruler, a credit card, whatever you have handy. We start with 3 horizontal lines that make up the front of the boat and the back of the boat that we see peeking over the edge. These can be as long as you want, but I wouldn't make them more than about 3 inches from the bottom to the top line. This height is going to determine the size of your boat. So draw 3 horizontal lines. Next, we need to draw a trapezoid. We need to draw 2 slanted lines going from the bottom line to the middle line. There's no math to get the correct angle, so just estimate. It's like a 45-degree angle. Now we need to draw the left side of the boat, And the most important part is that the point needs to be above or higher on the paper than that top line of our 3 horizontal lines. So you can make a little point where you want the tip of the triangle to go, and then of course line up your straight edge so you get a nice long triangle. Next, we need to connect the tip of that triangle to the topmost horizontal line. This creates what we see of the inside of the boat. Now we can repeat this process on the other side. So pick a point where the tip of the triangle will go above that horizontal line. Then you draw the sides of the triangle going to each point of that trapezoid. Now you can also connect the tip of the triangle back to that horizontal line, the topmost horizontal line. Now we need to draw the triangle that sticks up in the middle of the boat. So to start, we need to draw a vertical line that splits our boat in half. Now I'm not measuring it, so just eyeball it. Find about the halfway point of the boat, draw a vertical line all the way from the bottom of the boat, extending up as far as you want. That is going to be where the point of the triangle goes. In order to decide where each side starts, just know that it needs to be outside of that trapezoid. So that point where all the lines intersect, I'm going to go just to the left of that, draw a diagonal line up to that middle line. Same thing on the other side. Just to the right of that trapezoid is where my line goes, and then of course it meets the other line at that point exactly in the middle. Once you've done this, you can go ahead and clean up any extra little lines, anything that hangs over. The next step is to do our shading. Now, this first section, this top left section, that's the lightest section, it's just paper. We don't touch anything. You can actually erase a little bit of that outline because it needs to be very light. Now we can shade this lower left side, this long skinny triangle. This is our 90% darkness. So it can be quite dark. You can push down really hard, just not as hard as possible. Now there's a few ways that you can approach shading. Now you can see here I go back and forth. So I'm going back and forth, working my way across the triangle. And I slowly move lower. I'm trying to overlap all of my layers and my pencil marks so that I lose some of those individual pencil marks. I lose some of that texture. You can shade doing this in layers. So you'll see that I do one layer going one direction, and then I'll go ahead and do a second layer going in another direction. And this also helps camouflage some of those individual pencil marks. Some artists will shade using circles, and I recommend doing that only if it comes naturally to you. Now we will do this front left section of the boat, which is the darkest section, 100% darkness. So push as hard as you can, get the pencil as dark as you can on the paper. Now I recommend doing a little bit of an outline of this section, and this gives you a buffer zone. So once you define the edges clearly, you have a nice, crisp, clean edge. You can go ahead and fill it in like a coloring book. And of course, push down really hard. If you're not used to it, I always recommend shading more with the tip of the pencil. So I hold the pencil in a way that's comfortable as if I were writing. I recommend you do that too. And that will make a difference, especially when we get into the lighter shades. If you shade with the side of your pencil, you might notice that you get some of that texture of the paper coming through. Now we can start to attack the triangle in the middle of the boat. So to start, I'm going to make this little slit, right? There's a slit that goes down the center of that triangle. So it starts at the point. I go from the point just a little bit to the left and another line just a little bit to the right of the midline. So I end up with this little gap, this little slit in between the two sides of the triangle. We will fill that in later, but now it's time to shade the left side of that triangle that sticks up. The left side needs to be about 50% darkness. So this is right in the middle. Now you have to use less pressure, so be really conscious of using less pressure. Don't push down very hard. If it comes out really, really light, you can always darken it. You might also need to erase the line that is the back of the boat if you see it at this point. So you can see that, of course, even I have to go in and erase that line before I finish my shading, just so that everything is nice and even. As we go along, you can always come back to other sections of the boat and you can add more layers, you can darken it so that everything ends up with the right amount of contrast. Now the next section we're going to attack is this slit in the triangle. The space in between the triangles needs to be very, very light. It should be barely noticeable. So I'm going to fill that gap, that little slit in, but really light. Once I fill in that gap really lightly, I'm going to go along the right side and I'm going to darken that right side just a little bit. It almost makes it look like it's a shadow. Now the right side of this triangle needs to be even lighter. Now we're talking about 40 or even 30% pressure. So you have to be conscious to use so little pressure. Sometimes even just the weight of the pencil is enough. And if you do that in a few layers, you can get a really nice smooth color. Now we can attack the section that's the front of the boat, but on the right side. Now this is about 80% or 70% darkness. Again, you can always go darker later if you're not sure, but you can see I'm just going to work along the edge, of course, to make sure that I have a really crisp, clean line, and then fill in the blank. It's like a coloring book. Now, I don't recommend smudging your pencil, especially using your finger, except there is one place that I will talk about smudging. If you can get really smooth, even shading without smudging your pencil, what will happen is that all of your drawings will become more defined. And so this is one of the reasons that we practice doing this shading, getting really even colors of every single shade of the pencil, is because your drawings will look much cleaner if you can master this skill without utilizing too much smudging. The next section is the inside of the boat on the right side. The only difference with this section is we're going to try to add a little bit of a shadow. So you can see I'm working in that corner where those three sections all kind of combine. I'm going to make it darker in that corner, so I'm pushing down a little bit harder. And as I move out from the corner, I'll use less pressure, less pressure, less pressure until I'm barely touching the paper. The rest of the section needs to be quite light, about 20% darkness. So you really barely touch the paper. Now here's the last section. The right side, the long skinny triangle, is the lightest section that we're touching, so it's about 10% darkness. We will smudge for this one, but we need to put a little bit of graphite in this section before we smudge. So I lightly put a little bit of graphite along the top, a little bit of graphite along the side. I'm being really, really light and really sparse with my pencil. And once I have just a little bit of graphite, now I can use my finger and I'll gently drag the graphite across that section of the boat. This makes it really, really even, and it just brings the lightest amount of color to that section so that the eye can just barely discern that there's something there. Like I said, I don't recommend smudging with your finger. Most of the time, it is hard to control the graphite. It also adds oils from your fingers onto the paper. So in moderation, it's okay. But like I said, if you can master getting all your shading really even and really smooth without smudging, you're building the basic skills that are needed to create beautiful drawings. Of course, once you finish, make sure you sign your name. It's your artwork, you worked hard on it, and you have a beautiful paper boat. I hope you can use these skills in other classes. Use it to try and draw something that inspires you. You can look for more of my sketch classes coming up, and all of these skills will be utilized in other drawing classes that I teach. So thank you so much for joining me. Look for my other classes. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. Follow me on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram at Lexi Mitchell Artist.